Hello and welcome. I'm your instructor, Delmico L. Cunningham, and today what we're going to be looking at is actually how to start our modeling process here inside of 3D Studio Max. Now, the first thing that entails is actually being able to set up some type of blueprint so that I can see that within my frames here inside of Max. So there's two trains of thought when it comes to setting up schematic views inside of 3D Studio Max. One, you can use the old school method. The old school method is to actually make yourself a texture, or make yourself a shader rather, and attach a 2D texture to it, which would be your blueprints, and then you can display those in the viewport. And the first way we're going to go through is the old traditional way. So first, let's go and find ourselves some reference images. So I'm just going to take a look into our reference image folder in here and see what we have inside of here. So let's go back, and we got 3D references. We've got humans and animals, and I'm just going to go in here and I'm just going to use a clothed figure. So let's just use, let's say, this young lady right here. So I'm going to grab the images that I need for her, and looks like it doesn't really matter what I grab right now because I'm just using this as a proof of concept. So I'm just going to select those two images. So pretend like we got our images from the internet, although I have a huge library of reference images that I use for modeling purposes. So for this, we're going to do the old school method. And there's some things that there's one thing we need to know. One thing we need to know that can help us setting this up is actually knowing the size of this image. And this image looks like width is 1668 and height is 2175. So if I were here inside of 3D Studio Max, what I want to do is I want to make a plane. I'm going to do my plane in my front view. This is going to be my front view of my object. And go to my modify panel. Let's turn down, I don't need any of these width and length segments in here. What I really am concerned with is the length and width numbers right here. Now, something that I've done on mine, and you don't have to do this, but inside of my customize, inside of unit setup, right now I actually have been working on this project for some other reason. So my units are set to metric and not US standard or anything else. To set up this image and to set it up by the pixel count, so this pixel width and this pixel height, I don't want to do this in centimeters because centimeters is actually a measurement. It's a real world measurement, right? What I really want to do is I want to measure this kind of in pixels the same way the image is measured. If I put this on generic units and hit OK, my world has been switched out to generic units. Generic units are very much like pixel count. So what I'm going to do on this for the width, so for width I'm going to put 1668, and then for height we're going to do 2175. So 2175, hit enter. The thing that you'll realize is that my image is now, or my plane is now set to the exact size of my image in generic units. So I'm going to come in here and right click on wireframe, and I'm going to go to shaded view, and I'm even going to hit G to turn off the grid. I don't want to see grid right now. So inside of my viewport, I can see that in generic units and pixels, this is actually really big in pixels, right? And pixels are only measurable on a computer screen. You can't measure pixels in real life. I mean, I guess you could, but that would be a very, unrealistic way to measure things in real life because it's just a very small element. But in a computer, we're fine. So to go ahead and set up my image on this, I'm going to hit the M key to get my material editor to come up. And give it a second and let this bring up my material editor, and there it is, my slate material editor. And I'm going to go into my material editor, and I am going to make a standard shader. So there's my standard shader right there. I'm going to double click on this standard shader. And one of the first things I'm going to do is I'm going to rename this. And I'm going to rename this front underscore ref. This is my front reference. To add a 2D texture or an image to this diffuse, I'm going to click on the map box right here beside diffuse. And you'll know when you have your shader selected, you'll see the dotted lines around your shader when you know you have it selected. When you unselect it, you won't have any of those lines around your shader. So I'm going to go here to the diffuse and click on the map box. And what I'm going to add to this is a bitmap. And don't worry, everything inside of Max is realistically called a bitmap. Any type of image file is called a bitmap. And I'm going to go to my desktop where my images are. And there's my image that I had for the front. I'm going to hit open. This image is now attached to my shader. So I've got my shader and I have my image attached to the diffuse color slot. What I want to do is I'm going to assign this shader to my plane. So I'm going to grab this right here, left mouse click and drag this over to my plane. And now it is actually attached to that plane. Now, one thing that I need to do is, you can see I can't see that in viewport. To be able to see this map in viewport, what I want to do is click on my bitmap, double click on it, and then right up here at the top of your slate material editor, you will see there is a checker pattern with a little light, and it says show shaded material in viewport. If I click on that, you'll actually see right now that my image shows up in the viewport, and I can rotate around it. If I'm in perspective, I can rotate around my object, and there it is. It's sitting there. It's really awesome. And realistically, that was able to set all that up because I left my images in generic. I left my file in generic units. So let's look at this other one in here and see what the size of this one is. This one is 625 by 2247. So I'm going to do the same thing. But remember, I made this one from the front view. And it doesn't really, I mean, it does matter because it's actually the back view of my character, but I'm just going to pretend like right now this is a front view. So the other thing I want to do, I've made my front view and my back view for my particular reference. I now need to make a side view. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to come back here to my create panel, go down to plane, and I'm going to drag out a plane here inside of 3D Studio Max. There we go. And what I want to do on this plane, I'm going to go here to my modify panel. And for my width, I want to set my width to 625. That's our image size. And then the height to 2247. So that is my image from the side view. And I'm going to hit G to turn off the grid. And if you look, since those images were kind of sized off of the same thing, when I bring this in alignment, it's actually pretty close to being exactly where that needs to be. So what I want to do inside of my material editor is make a brand new shader. There's my shader sitting right there. So it's all new, nice and shiny. It's going to move some of the stuff around. There we go. I'm going to click this and minimize it so we don't see that huge shader list in there. So I'm going to double click on this shader, and I'm going to change this, and this is going to be side ref. And I'm going to come right here to my diffuse color again, go to the map box for diffuse, and say bitmap, and there's my side view. It's been added. Remember, I have it added, but it won't show up in viewport. So I'm going to double click on the bitmap and come up here to the top of my slate material editor. And I'm going to click on show shaded map in viewport. There it is. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to get my pick whip. So this is my output right here. So I'm going to click this output and drag it onto my new plane. And if you look at this right now in perspective, you can see that it actually lines up pretty well. If I come in here and do some, do a little bit more adjusting on this, I can get like the top of her head right there lined up. And once I line that up, it's actually pretty close to being where I need it to be at. One thing I'm going to do is I'm going to come in here and turn off realistic and put it on shaded view. I don't like looking at it in realistic because it tries to put shadows on everything, and I don't like looking at it in the viewport all the time. So I'm just kind of get this in the center, and this is set up. So if I were using this to model her, you can see for the most part it's pretty lined up. You know, if I look at this, the shoulders here, it probably ends up being a little bit like this, but you know, it's really the angle of the pictures that we're taking as well. So it's pretty close and pretty accurate. So I could use this to set up and start modeling. One thing I would do before I actually got into modeling inside of here though, I would actually come in here and select both of these planes, and I'm going to go to my layer manager. So right here on my toolbar there is a stack of looks like little papers, and that's my layer manager. So I'm going to click on my layer manager. I'm going to make a brand new layer. So here inside of my layer manager, you can see the very first selection says create new layer containing selected objects. So since I have these two planes selected, if I click on this button, it's going to make me a brand new layer called layer 1, and if I come here and click layer 1 open and look at it, I can see plane 01 and 02 have been added to my new layer. I'm going to actually double click on the layer 001, double click on it, and it lets me change the name of it. I'm now going to call this ref. So this will be my reference layer. And the other thing that I want to do is I want to actually freeze this layer. So I'm going to click on freeze. Now when I click on freeze, everything turns gray. Well, that's supposed to happen. I need to fix this gray. So what I'm going to do, I've got this layer frozen. You can see the layer is frozen. If I click off of it, unfreeze it, it goes back to normal. So, but what it does when I freeze something, it lets me not select it. So this is really unselectable at this point, which is what I want, because this is only going to be for reference images, right? So I'm going to come here, and I'm going to right click on my reference layer, and I'm going to go to the layer's properties. And inside of here, you'll see in display properties, there's a checkbox that says show frozen in gray. I'm going to uncheck that and hit OK. Right? And then for my object properties, I'm going to go to my object properties as well, and I'm going to uncheck show frozen in gray on object properties. When I do it on both, you can see that now I have this frozen. It's frozen, unfrozen, it doesn't turn gray, but when it's frozen I can't select it. Now the other thing you want to make sure you do before you start modeling is right now you'll notice that you are currently in your layer manager, you're currently working in the reference layer. You want to make sure that you click back on default. So this little checkbox right here, click back here on default so that you know that you're in layer, :0 default. And the reason for that is if you work in the frozen layer, whenever you bring something into the world, it'll let you create it, but since it's on a frozen layer, you'd never be able to manipulate it or move it. But you can see now on my default layer, I'm actually able to make this box, I can move the box, I can do what I want to do with the box, and everything is completely fine. The other thing that's very helpful when you're working on objects that you're trying to lay out and use as backgrounds here or schematics here inside of Max is the command of Alt plus X. Alt X activates your X-ray. So it lets you be able to see through geometry. That's really helpful when you're modeling because you can actually see through your topology and see the underlying blueprint and be able to model your stuff out. Right? So that's one method. That's the old school method of actually making an actual object, applying a shader to it, and having images on it, and all that jazz like that. And it's really handy. I still use this particular method on a lot of the things that I work on. I am familiar with it, and I like it. For me, it's not a huge issue. Some people don't like it because it has more steps to set this up. So I'm going to unfreeze this, and I'm going to come in here. See if we can get this thing to... So the method that we just looked at is the old school set up your planes method, and I'm just going to delete this stuff right now. Other than that, You can look back at this video and be able to see how to go back through this method, set it up with your planes, set it up with your shaders, and we will see you next time when we do our next video here inside of 3D Studio Max. Have a great day. Cheers.